On 22nd of April 1945, inside the Führerbunker, an order was issued that never entered standard logs. No targets, no coordinates, only a directive to erase a project entirely before capture. Time, collapsing around Berlin, became the primary enemy. Couriers carried the message to scattered facilities as artillery thundered closer. The wording was precise and unforgiving. Destroy equipment, documents, and chains of knowledge. Survival of the project, not defeat, was defined as the ultimate failure. Archival records show frantic reallocations in those final days. Power lines rerouted, rail cars reassigned, guards doubled. Resources were pulled from defenses to complete an ending rather than a last stand. At one site, engineers were ordered underground to dismantle apparatus still active. Gauges were smashed first, then controls. Logs indicate temperatures dropping as power increased, an inversion that alarmed even seasoned technicians. A young officer noted tremors and disorientation among staff. Medical notes list nausea, anxiety, metallic taste. Exposure limits were rewritten in pencil. The abstract antagonist was physics, indifferent to urgency or ideology. Institutional pressure narrowed oversight to a single signature. Requests for peer review were denied. Objections were logged as sabotage. Authority replaced caution as the right compressed into its final days. Interrogations later revealed the project's name changed repeatedly. Reclassification reset baselines, allowing anomalies to be relabeled as progress. Stability was promised, then postponed, then demanded. Witnesses described demolition charges placed not to scatter debris, but to collapse internal alignments. The intent was to prevent reassembly, not to hide existence. Geometry mattered more than blast radius. A surviving memo avoided the word weapon. It called the effort the condition, implying a state that emerged only when components aligned. The language suggested fear of continuation rather than discovery. As Soviet forces closed in, the final confirmation was sent. The project would end itself. What followed was silence. No reports, no debris, only coordinated gaps across archives. Engineers testified that the chamber was overbuilt for vibration, not blast. Walls layered to dampen resonance, floors floated on isolators. This was containment for behavior, suggesting the risk was interaction, not force or yield. An OSS field memo flagged procurement anomalies. Ceramics rated far beyond expected heat, mercury compounds without a clear process chain. Analysts suspected a coupling experiment. The file ends abruptly, with attachments listed but missing. Operational logs show pulse cycles coinciding with clock drift of several seconds in adjacent rooms. Calibration was blamed. Tests repeated. Drift returned. Time refused synchronization once the apparatus crossed a defined threshold. A physician assigned to the site recorded tremors, metallic taste, acute anxiety. He recommended suspension. The recommendation was stamped acknowledged and ignored. Exposure limits were lowered, then quietly exceeded. As defeat accelerated, authority hardened. Safety offices were bypassed. Project names changed weekly. Reclassification reset baselines, allowing instability to be reframed as novelty rather than failure. By early April, power draw exceeded forecasts. Transformers overheated. Emergency bypasses kept cycles alive. An engineer underlined a note twice. Shutdown was harder than startup. Post-war interrogations captured only negatives. Survivors spoke of what it was not, what it must never do again. None described function directly. The restraint felt collective and rehearsed. A British survey of the ruins found demolition patterns focused on geometry. Charges collapsed internal alignments rather than scattering parts. The goal was denial of reassembly, not evidence removal. One scorched note survived. If interrupted mid-cycle, isolate. The sentence trails off. No author. Investigators inferred continuity mattered more than control. A closing brief warned against myth-making. The danger, it said, was procedural. Restarting without context could recreate the condition. Knowledge, not hardware, was the vector. Post-war analysts struggled to classify what had been erased. It fit no weapons table and lacked a delivery system. The threat lay in behavior during operation, not in output, confounding assessments built on effects rather than processes. An OSS addendum proposed a project exploited resonance between coupled fields. It warned that partial reconstruction could recreate unstable states unpredictably. The recommendation was blunt: prevent convergent insight across teams at all costs. Technicians reported a low hum felt in teeth before instruments reacted. Operators learned to read bodies as sensors. When nausea spiked, cycles were cut. Data followed symptoms, reversing standard experimental discipline. As collapse tightened, authority replaced caution. Safety offices were bypassed. Red lines shifted weekly. Cancellation would admit a mistake too large to manage, so continuation persisted despite compounding anomalies. Thermal readings dipped while power rose. Shadows bent at edges. Engineers argued calibration. Physics answered with repeatability, asserting indifference to intent and ideology once configurations aligned. A fragmentary Soviet report later referenced a conditional apparatus destroyed by Germans themselves. Analysts suspected translation error. Cross-checks suggested the phrasing was precise, not metaphorical. Demolition teams hesitated when initial charges failed. Only after isolating modules did collapse propagate as planned. The delay implied interdependence across sections, confirming fears the whole behaved unlike its parts. After destruction, no radiation lingered. No residue marked the site. The absence frustrated investigators accustomed to signatures. Whatever existed left no conventional footprint once internal relationships were broken. A British brief warned that absence invites legend, yet insisted the real risk was procedural. Reassembly without context could recreate the condition. Knowledge, not hardware, was the vector. Custody debates ended with dispersion. Findings were split, redacted, and siloed so no office could hold the whole. Fragmentation, once the cause, became the cure. Allied agencies argued over custody. No one wanted sole responsibility for an undefined risk. The apparatus was gone, but its shadow lived on in reports stripped of diagrams, circulating as cautions without schematics or coordinates. Cold War planners absorbed the lesson quietly. Programs with unpredictable thresholds were split by design. Teams worked blind to one another, ensuring no single group could assemble a complete picture again. Later audits revealed sudden adoption of kill switches, isolation protocols, and incompatible standards. These appeared almost overnight after 1945, suggesting a doctrinal shock rather than gradual evolution. Human memory became the weak link. Surviving technicians were reassigned, their records sanitized. Interviews avoided specifics. Decades later, fear centered not on exposure, but on convergence. A 1952 interagency memo warned that merging partial insights could recreate unstable states unintentionally. Safety, it argued, would be achieved through incompatibility. Progress would be slowed deliberately to preserve reversibility. Skeptics claimed nothing substantive had existed. They cited missing hardware and absent data. Others countered that erasure was the evidence. The debate never resolved, but policy followed caution. Occasional claims of rediscovery triggered immediate review. Each time similarities tripped procedural alarms. Projects were dissolved early, not for failure, but for resemblance. By the late Cold War, references thinned. The lesson had been metabolized. Engineers learned limits as rules without stories. The cause no longer mattered, only the boundary. What survived was a principle without an origin. Never let all the pieces meet. Wholeness removed the option of reversal, and reversal was the only safety left. The project had to disappear because its existence demanded completeness, and completeness, once achieved, proved impossible to survive. Archivists in the 1960s noticed synchronized gaps across agencies for the same weeks of April 1945. Box numbers existed without contents. Indices referenced shelves never built. The pattern suggested coordinated removal, not wartime chaos. A retired analyst recalled a briefing with no diagrams, only arrows and warnings. The message was simple. Convergence creates states you cannot unwind. No one asked what had taught them that lesson. Whistleblowers later hinted at failed starts in subsequent programs. Each followed the same arc. Early anomalies appeared. Oversight intervened. Teams were split, and the work dissolved into incompatible paths. Training manuals reframed success. Completion was no longer achievement. Safe incompletion became the metric. Programs were praised for how cleanly they could stop, not how far they could push thresholds. Historians searching for the object itself found nothing solid. What they found instead were policies shaped like scars, review gates, isolation rings, and termination clauses that appeared abruptly after the war. Outside institutions, absence bred speculation. Legends filled the vacuum left by erased context. What had been destroyed to prevent recombination returned as myth, unbound by safeguards or restraint. Intelligence estimates warned that myths could pressure reconstruction. The paradox hardened. Hiding the truth reduced internal risk but increased external fascination. Inviting curiosity fragmentation tried to prevent. By the 1970s, the story thinned to a rumor of a rumor. Procedures remained. Safety culture had absorbed the lesson so fully that the cause no longer mattered, only the behavior to avoid. The human antagonist faded with time. The institutional one persisted. Systems learned to fear synthesis more than failure, preferring ignorance to coherence when stakes were undefined. Hitler's final order did not erase a machine. It rewired how dangerous knowledge would be handled forever, teaching future powers where to stop looking when continuation itself becomes the threat.